Hi everybody, welcome back to another Hoosier Animal Law Officers webinar. I am Hannah Fisher, I'm the president of HALO. This is going to be our first attempt with doing a Zoom webinar so that it's a little bit more interactive. So today's topic will be report writing, so let's get into this. So as a disclaimer, this webinar, the videos, pictures, everything in it was compiled by HALO, and this is for educational purposes only and is not intended for a substitute for consulting with legal professionals. So the objectives for today are to learn what a report is, learn why a detailed, organized report is important, learn the key components of a report, and we'll also walk through several examples of each, and then learn about things you should be including and maybe some things you shouldn't include in a report. So what is a report? A report is a written account of something that has been observed, heard, done, or investigated. So a report documents the things that we're going to. It documents the cases we investigate, the calls we take, the things we see, the things we do. It's an account given of a particular matter, especially in the form of an official document. So some of us have official reporting document programs that we use. Some of us maybe just use Word documents, but it's a thorough explanation of things we've seen, things we've done, and why a case went the way it went. So the basics of a report include the who, what, when, where, how, not so much the why. Unfortunately, we can't explain why people do what they do, but we can definitely touch on all the other things. So what did we see? Who was involved? When did this happen? Where did this happen? So let's start with when. So we want to make sure that we're including several things. We want to include the month, the day, and definitely the year. The day of the week may not be so relevant, but if it's something that goes on for several days, you may want to include that, but it's not necessary to say what day of the week it happened on, but definitely the month, day, and the year. In addition to when this is happening, you need to include the time. So one of the things we'll get into in the next slide is to use words like approximate. We never want to say exactly at 5 o'clock or in 10 minutes exactly. That gives the defense attorney some room to say, well, was it really 5 o'clock? Was it 5:01? Was it 4:59? And if it's time period, so if you're saying how long a dog drank for after you picked it up, if you said the dog drank water for a 30-second time period, well, if they record it and it was 20 seconds, that may not look so good. Another thing when it comes to time is military versus standard time. So some people use military time, so 1,400 hours or 1,600 hours, and some people use standard time, saying 2 p.m. or 4 p.m. or whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter unless your department has a policy. What does matter is be consistent. So don't use military time in one report and then go on to use standard time in another. Just make sure that you're always using the same format, report to report, and within the same report, you're using the same time. So here's an example of how you could open up a report. So on Thursday, if you choose to use the weekday, April 30th, 2020, at approximately 14:13 hours. So again, we use the word approximate because what if your watch said 14:13, but your cell phone said 14:14, and your dispatch system said 14:12? We don't want to create any room for a defense attorney to have an opportunity to say, well, it wasn't actually 14:30, so what else did they lie on in this report? So then you get into who. So there's going to be several people in your report. First and foremost, you need to say who you are. What is your name? What is your title? What department do you work for? Later in the report, you're going to include the suspects, the victims, the witnesses. So a couple things here, make sure you are using legal names. I've had a report pushed through where multiple times in our system she was referred to as Becky, but her legal name was Rebecca. So you can refer to her as Becky later in your report, but make sure somewhere in your report you are including their full legal name. Another thing to keep in mind is social media profiles. So if you get some of your investigative information off of social media profiles, make sure you refer to their account name as just that, their social media username. Because maybe she's Rebecca as a legal name, goes by Becky on the streets, and on Facebook her profile is Becca. So just make sure that when you're including names, you're making sure that you include their legal name at some point in the report, and then also put in any other aliases that they may have. So extending on the introduction, you would put your time, and then you would introduce who you are. So something else that we've added here while working in full uniform. This is more relevant for law enforcement officers who are required by state to be either in full uniform or in a marked vehicle for some of the things they do. But I encourage you to include it also, because that shows that when you went on this call, that you were in a recognizable uniform, they knew who you were, they knew what authority came along with that, and that you weren't just showing up on your day off in sweatpants. So say you're working in full uniform, say the agency that you work for, and then introduce yourself and use your title, whether it's officer, animal control officer, humane investigator, canine director, shelter director. Use your title, establish some sort of authority. So then in the introduction of the report, we want to touch a little bit on what we're going to be getting into, what we're talking about, what the case is about. So what's the call type? Is it a bite investigation? Is it a welfare check? Is it a human beating somebody? Whatever the case may be. And then include the source of the call. So where did this initial information come from? Why are you getting called to this address? And basically just summarize what we're going to get into more in the report so that people have an understanding of what they're about to read. So an example of this, extending on our original introduction, was received a complaint through the ACA's hotline, so the Animal Control Agency's hotline, about a subject keeping 2 thin dogs in a cage without food and water. So that substantiates what's our reason for concern. Why are we going to this address? What kind of flagged our attention to this address? And then where did the information come from? It came from the pizza delivery person the night before that was at this house and made this observation. So we may or may not include his actual information later, but at least we know where the initial call came in from. And then we need to say where. Where is this call? Where are we going? Where in relation to other things that may happen on the case did all of this take place? So you'll simply say the address is 123 North Main Street. Sometimes you can include, some people include the state. I personally don't include the state unless it's an out of state, because it can be assumed that I work in Indiana. I work in a centrally located area in Indiana, so more than likely I'm going to an Indiana address. But some people put the state, some people put the zip code, some people put the United States, but just some sort of recognizable address of where this all went. So now we're going to start getting into the meat and potatoes of the report. So the bulk of your report is going to be, what did you see? What did you hear? What did you do? Why did you do what you do? What actually happened throughout this investigation? So like I said, we're going to rely a lot on our senses: sight, touch, taste, smell, hearing. Of course, a lot of what we make our observations on are going to be based on what we see, but the other senses are involved, so we'll get into that. So what did you see when you went to this house, when you investigated this call? What about the condition of the house or the property? It may not be a violation to live in filth or to have trash on your property or live in unclean conditions. It may be with the health department and the code enforcement, but to just live in general disarray may not necessarily be a violation in itself, but it does help establish the scene, set the picture, kind of set the tone of the house that you're going to. What about animal shelter options? So what is the living conditions for the animal in terms of protection from the elements, protection from the outdoor, the ability to have someplace clean to sit? So take pictures of these and document these, and these can be used to substantiate things in your report, or they can be used to track progress. What about the animals themselves? What do they look like? So in this picture, this was actually a case I had. This animal had been down for several hours. So as you'll see around the animal, you'll see this kind of red ring. That's a red circle completely around. Now it may look like blood, but what that actually is that animal had been down and suffering for so long that it was kicking and trying to stand up. So it had actually put a rut and discolored the grass from struggling to get back up. So this helps establish a couple of things. Obviously, the condition of this animal is very questionable, very poor shape. The animal also had some wounds, unknown source, but had some wounds, was bleeding out. But it also establishes that this animal had been down for an extended period of time. What about feces and urine? Is feces and urine present? Obviously, in this picture here, feces is very much present. We can talk about how the litter box was so used and so overflown that the cats had to resort to using areas around the litter box or just floor area or surface areas to go. But then also, what if there's not feces? What if you're not smelling urine? What if the animal doesn't urinate once you pick it up and it's in your care for an extended period of time? That could be just as concerning, because if there's not fecal matter, that may mean that the animal is not having nutrition, not taking any substance in to then push substance out. So make sure you're keeping in mind what feces and urine buildup and accumulation you see or don't see. What about food and water sources? So in this picture, for example, you see that this water source has floating food in it, it has dirt in it, it has gravel in it, and the levels aren't that high. It's hard to see in this picture, but the level that's here on the edge was basically all the water that was out there. And on this particular case, there were 9 dogs on that property. Excuse me, so 9 dogs drinking that little bit of water, that's not going to last them very long. Alternatively, what if you have a dry bowl? What if you have a bowl that is so out of water that it doesn't have any water in it at all, doesn't have any residue of water anymore? That could be concerning too. Another thing to keep in mind is tethers, chains, books, supplements, paraphernalia. This is indicative of a lot of animal fighting, perhaps. That's when you'll most commonly see this, but anything that kind of catches your eye as unusual to be around an animal. And then also any evidence of other crimes. So are there handguns? Are there drugs? Are there weapons? Is there child abuse? Is there other abuse going on? So just keep an open eye. Don't stay so focused on the animal situation that you don't notice other things going on at the property. So what do you smell? So if you've worked a case like this, you know that smell. So the thing about smell is it's not necessarily something you can substantiate. With some of the things we talked about on the previous slide, you could say, I saw 6 dogs. Well, okay, that's pretty easy to prove that there were 6 dogs on the property. Or if you say, I saw a water bowl that was empty, that's pretty easy to prove. Smells, on the other hand, are not something that you can completely translate easily to a report. However, something we can do once you get experience, once you have been to a house like this, is to say, through my training and experience, I noticed the smell that I know to commonly be associated with large amounts of animals or large amounts of animal waste. And that's something that'll come with time. And once you've been to the house or been to these calls and worked these cases multiple times, you'll have that ability to say, through my training and experience, I recognized a smell to be associated with X, Y, and Z. What about what do you hear? So barking, whimpering, whining, growling, all these things listed. Animal noises, obviously document those. If an animal is whimpering or whining, why? Is it in pain? Is it hurt? Is it caught on something? Is it being abused? What's going on? But then some of the other things to consider are ventilation. Is there airflow in the area that the animal is at? What about treadmills? This again is associated perhaps with the animal fighting. And then what about yelling? If you walk on the property and they don't notice that you're there yet and you hear the owner yelling at the dog, or maybe you hear it kicking or beating the dog, make note of all of that. Conversely, what if you don't hear sounds? Most animals will make noise. Most cats will meow, purr, most dogs will bark or whimper. But what if you're not hearing sounds? Could that be that the animal is so lethargic, so unresponsive, that it doesn't have the ability to vocalize anymore? So make sure that when you're hearing or not hearing these sounds, you know why you're hearing or not hearing these sounds, because it could be very crucial to your report and to your investigation. What do you feel and touch? So climate conditions. What if the air is stale? So we talked about hearing a ventilation system. What if we don't hear ventilation and the air feels stale? So again, that's something that'll come with experience, or maybe you've experienced it in the lovely humid Indiana summers that we have. But just document what the temperature feels like, what the air feels like, what the climate feels like in general. In addition to the climate conditions, what about the animals? Fur, for the most part, should be soft and fuzzy and slick. Feathers, same way. Scales have a certain feel. Most animals' noses should be wet. And again, talking about the dryness of the water bowl. So if something doesn't feel right, or in your experiences feels abnormal from what it should be, make sure you document that. What do you taste? So again, if you've been in this house, you've experienced the ammonia and the urine kind of sensation in your throat. Again, we can't directly translate to this report. We can't say, I tasted a cat hoarder house, because that just sounds awkward and gross. But if you've been in this house, you have tasted a cat hoarder house. So if you have that sensation, if you have that burning in your throat, if you feel that ammonia in your nasal cavity, in your throat cavity, make sure you're documenting that, because if it's so profound that you're experiencing it in your airway, in your throat, that's worth documenting. So moving on to organization and flow of reports. So we want to document everything we just talked about. We want to document the what did we see, what did we hear, what did we see, all of those things. But how do we put it together? So I love this example from Wikipedia because it explains what a run-on sentence is. And if you pause the video and you read through it, this is a run-on sentence. So it's just kind of a little bit of irony that I'm sure was intentional. But we don't want that. We don't want one big paragraph. We don't want a page-long report that just says, I saw this, I tasted this, I did this, I saw that, I heard this. We want there to be some organization and flow to it. So how do we do that? So use some section headings. So this could be maybe day 1, day 2, day 3 on your investigation, or it could be in the barn I saw this, in the house I saw this, in the trailer I saw this. But break it up, give some headings. You could do it by people. So I talked to the owner, and then I talked to neighbor 1, and then I talked to neighbor 2. And use bullet points. Don't be afraid to use bullet points. So if there's 10 animals on the property, give each animal a bullet point and say, animal 1, this was its condition, this was its name, this is what I know about it. Animal 2, and so forth. And please use paragraphs, use sentences. Again, we don't want those big blocks of this being a paragraph and this being a paragraph and it just being all blurred together. Break it up, use grammar. It's easier for you. It'll be better for the judge and the jury. It'll be better for your peers that maybe go to this house at a later date. So organize your report as clearly as you can. And also make sure you're telling the story and doing your report in a logical manner, and it has a flow. So you don't want to say on day 3, I impounded the dog, and then at the bottom of the report, it tells you what you did on day 1. So make sure there is some flow. Sometimes it can get hard if you have cases where your day 1 is actually day 20 of the situation, or if there's some back and forth, or if you find something out on this day, but then 3 days later you find out something that had happened before, maybe from a witness. But again, try to make your flow as best as possible so that when people are reading it, it's telling that story and it's easy to comprehend what happened. So stick to your level of training and knowledge. Most of us are not vet techs, most of us are not vets. Some of us are, some people have more training than others. But make sure that what you're saying, you are certified, you are equipped to say that. So for somebody like me, I'm not a vet tech, I'm not a vet, I couldn't say that the animal had X, Y, and Z diagnosis. Now, a lot of us have familiarity with a lot of these conditions and maybe have been around it enough to say that symptoms A, B, and C more than likely means diagnosis X, Y, Z, but we can't say that because that's not within our scope of knowledge. So just describe what you're seeing, describe what you're documenting, and maybe you could say it's consistent with something. So mange would be a perfect example. We can't necessarily say that an animal has mange, but we could say all of the symptoms of mange. So loss of hair, crustiness, maybe if you see something on it, whatever the case may be, is consistent with it. But unless you have that certification, unless you are truly an expert in the field, make sure you're just describing the situation, describing the circumstances, because you don't want to get hemmed up saying that the animal had this or this was going on, and then a vet in the court come out and say it wasn't that at all. So on that similar note, make sure that you're being as objective as possible. So some differences here. Don't put in your report, the dog seemed aggressive. What does that mean? What does seemed mean? What does aggressive mean? Elaborate, use things that are definitive, that illustrate the situation. So maybe instead say, the dog was growling, showing its teeth, and its hackles were up. These are all things that we know to typically be indicative of aggression within a dog, or at least a portrayal of aggression. So another example would be, the horse appeared thin. Well, geez, what does that mean? So use something like the horse, whose ribs, hip bones, and shoulder blades showed, scored as approximately a 3 on the Henneke scoring system. So the Henneke scoring system is a body condition scoring system that we typically see with horses, that we use with horses. And so that has an objective chart. It has objective information, and it shows different characteristics and different factors to reach those levels, and is much more illustrative than the horse appeared thin. So some miscellaneous things. Do not use definitive breeds. Don't say the dog was a German Shepherd, the dog was a poodle, the dog was a Chihuahua, the cat was a whatever the cat breed was. Don't use definitive breeds, because again, that gives room for defense attorneys to come in and say, it wasn't actually a German Shepherd, it was a German Shepherd with a little bit of Husky mixed in, or it wasn't a Chihuahua, it was a miniature pinscher. Like, just make sure that you are using words like mix or words like type, again, to take out that discrepancy and that ability for defense attorneys to come in. Yes, there are some breeds that you can probably confidently say that dog is a German Shepherd, but unless you run DNA testing on it, that dog isn't a German Shepherd. That dog looks like a German Shepherd, it acts like a German Shepherd, but we have no concrete proof. We didn't run DNA evidence or DNA blood work to show that that really is a German Shepherd. So just don't back yourself into a corner. So I'll give you a minute to figure this out, and it's put on there correctly. This is not a typo. So one of the things you need to make sure you're doing in reports is any acronym that you use, put it somewhere first before you use the acronym. So this acronym stands for, don't use acronyms or shorthand that you have not explained previously in the report. So some examples. We know what ACO is. Most people that read our reports are going to know what an ACO is, but your judge, your jury, are they going to know if you just put ACO in there without explaining it? So the first time you use this acronym, make sure that you explain what it is. Once you say what it is, you can go on and use the acronym, but give an explanation up front. So other examples, BCS, RVT, there's all sorts of them within the profession, and you can use acronyms, just make sure you're explaining them. So let's talk pictures. How many pictures should you take? All of the pictures. Take all of the pictures. So the golden 4 pictures for any animal case that you work would be these 4. So at the bottom, we have an overview that shows the dog from above. So we can see its body condition, we can look at the waist and the hip tuck, we can look at the shoulder blade area, give a general overview of the condition of the animal. You should have a face shot so you can identify the dog. You should have a left side and you should have a right side. Now, if you look at this right side, this is not an ideal right side, and I did this intentionally because animals are living creatures. Obviously, some of them will stay where we put them to take these pictures, but a lot of the times you're going to be fighting their wiggliness, their squirminess, their uncomfortableness. So just get them best you can. And try not to take pictures where it looks like you're strangling the animal. So cats, it's really difficult to do because a lot of times we want to maybe hold them underneath the neck. And like right now, I'm not strangling myself, obviously, I'm just holding it, but it looks questionable. So make sure that when you're holding animals, maybe you're using their chin, we're using a flat hand, so it doesn't look like we're choking them. Try not to get pictures of cats scruffing them. We all know that that's a relatively humane way to handle a cat sometimes, but it doesn't look the best. And if you have a leash on the dog, make sure that it's not cinched down, because that doesn't look the best too. So some other pictures with livestock, especially with horses, trying to get a 45-degree kind of angled shot is going to show you a lot more than that straight side picture is going to do, because this allows us to see kind of the tailbones, the hip bones, the ribs, all of this tuck right there for this horse that's too thin. We're going to see more kind of offset. I know this is hard to see. We're going to see more of it kind of offset than if you take it straight on. Some other pictures, numbers, if you have something that you measured. So this case on the right was a rope that was around a dog's neck. So it was cut off. I took a picture of it from the length of the actual rope. So how long is it? And then I also, best I could, reapproximated a circle to show how big the circumference of it was. So that could eventually come down the road later, because if you take this and then you take a measurement of the dog's neck, and the dog's neck after it basically recovered is 7 inches, and the rope that was on there is 6 inches, that may be something to work with. So some other picture approaches: take the big picture, take things from back far, but then also make sure you're taking pictures up close. So here on the left, we have a grassy field with something. I know what that is because this was my case, but you don't know what that is. The judge doesn't know what that is. That's what that is, laying in the ditch. So, and that dog was humanely euthanized. It was ancient. It was like a 20-year-old dog. But when it first came out, it was a neglect investigation. But make sure you're taking pictures to set the scene and then up close of what we want to focus on. So some other ideas for pictures. On the left, we have a Great Dane type dog in a kennel that clearly is too small for it. You can see that because the dog can't naturally hold its head up. You can see an unnatural bend and crouchiness in its back legs. And so take pictures. You want to take pictures of the dog outside of the kennel and of the kennel also once the dog is out, but take pictures of the dogs in their kennels too. Another thing, if there's feces in there, if there's layers and layers of soiled puppy pads or layers and layers of soiled blankets, take pictures of those also. And then on the left, this is an example of a dog that was really thin, that had a collar on. And this isn't a direct connection. This doesn't necessarily prove anything, but this collar, which is a nylon collar, so doesn't have a lot of flexibility, doesn't have much stretch to it, it can be assumed that at some point this collar was put to that size because that's how big that dog was now. Well, now we have what was almost like a 2 or 3 inch gap in between the neck of the dog and the collar. This shows that that animal potentially lost that much weight, that this collar is way too big for it now. Again, that's not a direct correlation. It could be because they didn't have another collar, they just threw this collar on it, but still document those kind of things because it may be helpful down the road. On the right, this was a community cat that again was humanely euthanized because of its condition. But if you have any wounds, if you have any blood, if you have anything that looks unnatural, be taking pictures of those. Some of these pictures that I'm discussing, you should take on scene best you can. Some of these cases, we need to get animals to the vet or impound them as soon as possible, but try to take pictures in the scene at the location and then take follow-up pictures after that. So this one is an example of an owner whose dog was found running at large quite a few times. So I took a picture of the enclosure. So what we see here is they have reinforced, or at least tried to reinforce, the base of the fence with cinder blocks. So this could be taken one of two ways. This could be taken as the owner is aware of the situation, the owner knows that the dog is getting out and thus has reinforced the fence, or it could be taken as the owner knows that the dog is getting out and only halfway tried to correct the issue. But either way, it shows the enclosure that the dog's in. It could show that the owner was trying to be proactive, or perhaps there's not cinder blocks there and you have a big hole in the fence, and you can show that the owner should have known that this hole was in the fence but didn't do anything. So last couple of pictures I think to talk about are cars that are in the hot sun. These have been probably two of my favorite pictures. Last summer, that an animal was left in a hot vehicle. Both vehicles were black. The sky was clear. There was very few clouds, and I was able to get these pretty cool pictures that showed on the left, obviously there's no shade, no blockage of the sun beating down. And on the right, an even cooler picture, completely unadulterated picture. This is how my phone took the original picture. We see the hot sun, or at least the bright sun, and we see that the rays are directly hitting this vehicle. So again, you don't have to be an expert to take pictures, just take the pictures. That's step one, just take the pictures. So moving on, the Board of Animal Health, who we talked about in one of our previous webinars, should be involved with your reports. They should be involved with your cases. So if you get BOAH involved and they send you one of their reports, put their quotes in your report. They are the vets. They can say these things. They can say that the animal more than likely has this. They can say that the animal's condition is consistent with this. They are the expert when it comes to the medical condition of the animals. So what can they say in their report with expertise and with the certification behind them? What can they say that you can't? And what conclusions can they draw? Do they say at the bottom of their report that this animal should be removed? Do they say at the bottom of their report the animal should be euthanized? Put that information in there. That's a crucial part of your report. So wrapping it up towards the bottom of your report, you should make the last statement as profound as possible and use the language of the law. We would like to think that the prosecutors know the animal law, that they read through this and understand what charges we're seeking, but we need to spoon feed it to them. We need to make sure they know what we're asking for, what charge happened, why the elements of that statute were met. So as an example, Joe Smith neglected his 2 domesticated dogs by restraining them in a manner that seriously endangered their health or their lives and failing to provide adequate food and water. So if you read the criminal code, a lot of this language is basically copy and pasted from the statute. So he neglected his dogs, that's the crime. How did he neglect the dogs? How did he fulfill the definition of neglect? So use the language of the law and start with the summary, list everything that you saw, did, heard, experienced, and then at the very end say, at the end of the day, this is the crime that was committed, these are the charges I'm asking, and this is why that charge was met. Please spell check, proofread. If it's a big case, have somebody else spell check and proofread. There's nothing that looks tackier than a report that's submitted that has a bunch of spelling errors, that has the wrong their use or the wrong to or your use. So make sure that you're reading through the report. And if it's a big case, which really all of your cases are big, but if it's a big case that you're going to be seeking charges on, maybe have somebody else read it. If you don't have somebody else that can read it out loud. Reading it in your head versus reading it out loud, you're going to catch a lot more of your mistakes and errors and be able to fix them. So proofread, proofread, proofread. So what if you don't have a reporting system? What if you're not hooked into the law enforcement system within your county? What if you don't have a reporting system at your shelter? This is what you do. Everybody has Microsoft Word, or everybody has access to a computer that has Microsoft Word, or access to Notepad, or some sort of word processing system. You type all this up, you copy and paste your pictures in, and then you send it to yourself in a report. So not only is it written down and documented, you now have a time-stamped system and time-stamped report generation showing that it happened on this day, and I can prove it happened on this day because I emailed it to myself the next day after I completed my report. It may help you out tremendously in the future. So that said, make sure whatever email address you're using is either your professional email address through your agency or it's an email address that you use only for this purpose. Don't use your email address that you use for your gym membership and your Uber Eats account and your Airbnb account. Don't use that account for this purpose. You need to keep those separated, but email a Word document or some sort of documentation to yourself so that you have that permanently on file. So hopefully a lot was learned in this. Hopefully you at least got one thing out of this that you maybe didn't consider in the past. We will try to post some example reports up, or if you want some example of reports of a particular case type, feel free to reach out to us and we'll get you that information. But just to kind of recap on what the objectives were. So a report is the written account of what happened. So this is going to be used in court later because the judge, the juries, the courts, the other investigators perhaps can't directly be involved in your case all the time. They don't get to experience it like you do. So you're documenting this, you're telling the story, and you're making a permanent record that can be utilized later. So why is it important? Again, if it's not written down, it didn't happen. If you don't document it, who's to say that any of the things that you're saying later on happened? So make sure that you wrote it down, make sure it's documented. And again, your judge, jury, courts, they don't get to be there. So you need to make sure that you are doing a thorough job of documenting it. So what should be in a report? When did this all happen? Who are you? Who are the other investigators involved? Who are your witnesses, your suspects, your victims? Who are the animals that are involved? And then what? What did you see? What did you hear? What did you taste? What happened? Why did you do what you do? And then some things to keep in mind Acronyms and shorthand, make sure you explain those. Be objective, not subjective. Include BOAH in your report. Put in there what they can say that you can't. Stick to your own level of training. Take all of the pictures and make sure it's organized. So at the end of the day, your report is a written documentation. It's like a book. It's going to tell the story, but what your story needs to do is make the audience, make the judges and the courts and the juries, make them feel like they are living it. Make sure that when you're writing your report, they feel like they are in that moment. They can feel the pain of the animals. They can smell the things you smell. They can hear the things you hear. So you want to make your story a good story. You want to make it feel like it could be replicated, that it could be turned into a movie. So again, I hope you got something out of this webinar. We are going to be posting it on YouTube, and it is a free resource. Feel free to share. Again, if you want some examples of reports, or if you have questions about this, comment on the video, reach out to us, and be sure to like us on Facebook and check out our website. Everybody stay safe out there.